guys. Give us a minute. Get caught up with our radio.
Oh, hey. Haunts of Richmond is live.
Woohoo! And the cats are playing.
Facebook just told me.
We should be getting our countdown shortly.
Yeah. We always like to check in with people. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, what's...
Oh, nothing.
Don't tell me uh-oh.
No uh-ohs?
No uh-ohs. No uh-ohs. SpaghettiOs.
Hey.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4,
Hey, Whitney.
3, 2, 1.
Love talk.
Love Talk Radio.
You not. Don't you dare. Don't you dare.
Hi, everybody.
Kittens
Yes.
jumping through cords.
Vampires. Yes, we got vampires tonight. Yeah, Whitney's here. Glenn's here.
Woohoo!
So, hey, how's everybody doing?
I'm in the full vampire Borat guard, so I'm got my bats.
She's all decked out. I'm just...
When you have bat hair clips, you have to wear them for vampires. I mean, come on.
I'm being bad. I'm being a bad ghost host. I'm not even wearing a ghost shirt tonight.
He's channeling Tony Stark now. If we could just have Tony Stark's bank account, we'll be great.
Details. But yeah,
Imagine the expansion we could do with that.
we're here for another fireside chat. So
Yes, because it's cold outside.
it got a little chilly out, and we got cats running around everywhere. So we'll try to keep the distractions to a minimum. But yeah, good luck with that.
Kittens.
Kittens.
Need we say more? Cheers, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, Patrick's here. Yep. We'll get to your werewolf night in January.
Yes.
Along with Glenn's.
We're going to do state parks.
Yes.
So...
Yep, that's how we'll work in Point Lookout.
Yeah, I gotta see if I can find some more stories for Point Lookout since we've already done a few.
Yeah, but we'll figure it out.
But
Where is the garlic? The garlic? Did we have? Was there garlic in dinner?
no, there was not garlic.
No garlic in dinner.
No.
We're in trouble.
We're already vampires. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah. So anyway, it's been we've been busy.
Yeah, of course tours are still going, but this past weekend, 4 out of the 7 of the Haunts of Richmond crew were out investigating. Chris and I were on the Wisconsin battleship in Norfolk, and 2 of our other guides, Marcia and Allison, were at the Masonic Lodge in Norfolk, and we just had a good old time just spending the night with the ghosts. You want to play fast, Jude?
Of course she does.
Yep. So we had some interaction. Apparently an RVA Paranormal had a really cool event happen. They played chess with a ghost in the captain's quarters. We didn't get that. we instead encountered a junior officer getting dressed down, and he was not pleased because he had just been dressed down by an officer. He apparently served in World War II. So that was our biggest interaction for the evening.
Yeah, it was a fun night.
Yeah.
And definitely a joy and privilege to be able to be a part of it.
Yeah, we got to spend the night on the ship, which was awesome. Overnight, I actually heard phantom conversations, probably 1940s music, I would guess, because it was definitely an older style wartime music. We heard the whistles calling the officers out of their bunks. Other members of the group that spent the night heard people actually climb out of bunks when there was no other person around them in the bunk. So yeah, there was a lot of activity overnight while we were sleeping.
Did they win at chess?
I don't know. John didn't say, neither did...
Didn't get into those details.
No, we didn't get a chance to really chat about it. I got told, we got to tell you what we encountered, and then we partied and we never got told. I found out about it on their Facebook page afterward. I was like, oh, I bet you that's what you wanted to tell me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll have to message Lynn to find out.
Allison says they had a Shriner.
Ooh.
So.
Fun.
Yep. It was good. Good weekend all around.
It was a lot of fun. If you have never been to the battleship, definitely go. Well worth the trip to Norfolk and just to see this incredible piece of history. Our guide who was taking us around the ship had a lot of fun anecdotes for us, talking about the one time it actually did engage in land-to-sea combat and was hit by a missile coming out of Korea. It immediately brought around its broadside and basically launched a bunch of fire at the land-based missile that just shot at them and completely decimated it, and the one carrier ship that was with it just radioed over temper. So yeah. But yeah, it was a fun night. So yeah, we're here to talk about some vampires. Or do we have a comment?
Whitney says the Masonic Lodge in Norfolk was next to her parents' high school.
Oh.
And yep, we had a lot of fun. Patrick had great pictures that we posted on Facebook. Very photogenic ship. It made it very easy.
I did not take as many photos as I should have, but
yeah,
it was a lot of fun. I'm wishing I'd taken pictures up in the captain's quarters and the admiral's quarters.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's all right. Maybe
yeah.
another time.
Yep.
But in the meantime, tonight we got everybody's favorite blood-sucking creatures of the night.
Yes. So let's start with what, of course, is a vampire. Most people at this point in time believe it is a myth, a fictional character coming from the ghoulish imaginations of the macabre writers, especially Bram Stoker, who wrote our most famous vampire story, Dracula. But these are not really creatures you want to dismiss. One Italian author, Amelia, and I apologize if I butcher her name, Armella Voltala, who wrote the definitive work on the subject, says a vampire is a dead person who survives his or her own death by feeding on the blood of the living. It also means anyone with a thirst for human blood, and by a curious inversion of the sense also applies to the living who disturb the peace of the grave, as well as to the dead who arise to trouble the sleeping of the living. There we go. I apparently need more wine. So that is her actual definition of it. So that's a really broad spectrum.
Mm-hmm. All over the place.
Yeah.
And they basically, people have taken liberties with that and portrayed them in so many different ways over the years. And yeah, energy vampires.
Yeah. Which I've encountered, by the way. They're not fun. I swear I used to work with a few of them. Anyway, moving on. I will not name names. Alright, so the historical precedents, there's actually some documented evidence that supports that vampires actually may have existed, especially in the Eastern Europe part of the world in the past century. So Paul Barber, who wrote Vampires, Burial, and Death in the early 17th century, actually talked about a documented case of a Serbian soldier who fell off of a hay wagon and became one of history's most notable examples of documented vampirism. The ex-soldier broke his neck and died in the fall, but soon after his burial he began to harass the townspeople, even killing 4 of them. Suspecting evil, the authorities exhumed his body and observed a lack of decay, fresh blood, and other evidence that he was a vampire. At this point, the body was disposed of in a way that is supposed to eliminate further possibility of mischief, and the haunting stopped. By that we mean they burned his body and they scattered his ashes. Similar tales have persisted throughout the world, and belief in vampires and others who rise from the grave has become quite widespread. In Strange Stories and Amazing Facts, the editors of the Reader's Digest noted that travelers who visited remote parts of Transylvania in the 16th century returned with strange and horrifying tales of creatures that were neither living nor dead. Creatures that had left their haunts at night and feasted on human blood. Such a species, it was noted, is said to be recognizable by its gaunt appearance and pale complexion. It is also said to have full red lips and pointed canine teeth, gleaming eyes with a hypnotic gaze, long sharp fingernails, eyebrows that meet, and hair at the palms of its hands. Its breath is said to be foul. Its diet of blood endows it with superhuman strength, despite its cadaverous, emaciated appearance. Now, as we mentioned, Dracula is the most famous vampire in the world, and of course this was created by Bram Stoker. First published in London in 1897, the character of Dracula was actually based on a real-life person, Prince Vlad IV, who was a Wallachian prince who ruled Romania in the 15th century. He was also known as Vlad III Dracula. He was a ruler widely believed to be the basis of Dracula because of his bloodlust. He liked to torture people. He would impale his enemies on the battlefield to deter other enemies. And it was said that he would dine among the thousands of soldiers and citizens that he had staked onto poles, supping and bathing in their life fluid, was what the description said. During invasions, he was also known to use the scorched earth policy, a military strategy that consists of destroying any and all possible resources that the enemy could use by poisoning water supplies, burning crops, etc. Prince Lad died in 1477, and the rumors surfaced almost immediately that he had risen from the grave and was in search of more blood. Of course, Vlad isn't the only vampire that is around in history. There were actually several tales that I was able to find that span all throughout the world and all throughout the centuries, so I hope you enjoy the ones I've selected for tonight.
Yes, so yeah, we bounce around a little bit, and Glenn actually asked us about the Richmond vampire, which we do talk about on our tours.
Yes.
So we're going to be sharing the limelight with some other vampires tonight.
Yeah, I do have 2 Virginia ones.
Yep.
Just not the Richmond one. So these are 2 that you might not be familiar with.
And yeah, I'm not cooperating a little bit. But anyways, we can.
I can. You want to go?
Yeah, I want to go.
Okay.
The Vampire Plague of Venice.
Chris likes this one.
Yeah, I do like it. It's a very interesting one. And, but yeah, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to start off just over on the other side of the pond. And, Steve says hi.
Hi, Steve.
But, so anyways, we're going back quite a ways, almost 400 years at this point, back to 1629, 1630, and this was the time that the Black Death descended upon Italy, killing as many as 280,000 people. And in the isolated and crowded city of Venice, the disease hit hard, taking nearly a third of the population. 46,000 people out of just 140,000 died in the city of Venice. And the death and resulting chaos deeply brought the once great maritime empire to its knees. As you might imagine, that's pretty devastating.
1/3 of your population gone is not good.
So, in an attempt to prevent disasters like this, Venice had long ago, they had created 2 quarantine islands on the outskirts of the city, known as Lazaretto Viejo, the old quarantine, and Lazaretto Nuevo, the new quarantine. Very, very original names, old and new. But anyway, so during normal times, these islands functioned primarily as a filter. So basically, any ships that were coming in from overseas, they would make the sailors go ahead and stay there for a few days so that they could be screened and make sure that they weren't bringing any plagues or anything like that into Venice.
So think Ellis Island. It's Venice's version of Ellis Island.
Yeah. But in the desperate times that came with the Black Death, citizens were taken by force and marooned on the islands where they were just simply left to die. Mass graves containing thousands of bodies have been uncovered on both islands in recent years. But more distressingly than the plague bodies, recent excavations also uncovered the skull of a woman with a brick jammed in her mouth. Now, this kind of left her in an eternal scream, brick jammed in there. That, kind of hurts to think about it, particularly you with your jaw surgery and all that.
Ow.
So, this was the prescribed method in the mid-17th century for dealing with shroud eaters, which is just basically a type of vampire that was also known as the chewing dead. These particular vampires were believed to be able to cause death and disease from the comfort of their own graves, laying there in the dark, possessed and chewing at their burial garments. Vigilant citizens who somehow noticed unsettling masticating sounds emerging from the grave or spotted the blood-stained mouths of the recently deceased, which
is completely normal, by the way.
Completely normal. So, but anyways, they took it upon themselves to put an end to the shroud eaters' reign of terror by inserting a brick in their mouth. Now, although stories of the chewing dead and treatments for them had long been a part of vampire lore, finding actual evidence of this is something that is extremely rare. Most people of the era just simply wanted to divisively deal with shroud eaters and chewing dead by cutting off their heads or putting a stake through the heart, stuff like that. And but there was one man that took particular issue with these tactics.
He didn't like it at all.
No. Now, This man was a theologian by the name of Philip Rohr, and he believed that he was living in the midst of a full-blown vampire epidemic. But the vampires were victims just as much as those that they actually feasted on. So, Rohr vehemently protested actions that would desecrate the bodies of the dead, vampire or not. So, no cutting off heads, no stakes through the heart. So, what do you do to deal with these vampires?
You shove a brick in their mouth.
Rohr clearly states that to treat the dead with such disrespect and judgment was morally wrong, and that fear of the living dead only incited people to sin. His solution was the brick-in-the-mouth method that would halt the chewing dead and their gnawing ways, but still save the body from general desecration. In turn, this would also save the immortal souls of those who acted to combat the threat of the chewing dead.
I'll take my beheadal, thank you.
Highgate.
Used to live right near the cemetery. Yeah, when I studied abroad for a semester in London, I lived right near Highgate Cemetery, and it is creepy as all get out. Let me just tell you that. All right, so in northern London, this was a cemetery that was known for having the tombstones of Dickens being there, Karl Marx. It's also famous for being the cemetery that has the Highgate vampire. According to this urban legend, the Highgate vampire is 7-foot-tall phantom and has attacked people since 1960. The cemetery opened in 1839. It was one of its most infamous cemeteries, originally opened as one of the city's magnificent 7 park cemeteries. The initial design was carried by architect Stephen Gary. Now, among the impressive Victorian and Egyptian-influenced tombs are the gravestone, as I mentioned, of Karl Marx, the sci-fi author Douglas Adams, James Holman, a sightless 19th century adventurer known as the Blind Traveler, who was also a pioneer in human elocution. He was able to sense his surroundings by the reverberations of a tapped cane or a horse's hoofbeats. Adam Worth, who was a famous criminal and possible inspiration for Sherlock Holmes' nemesis, Professor Moriarty. Now this, of course, included the other 6 cemeteries, which was Kensal Green, West Norwood, Abbey Park, Nunhead, Brompton, and Tower Hamlets. Those were the full Magnificent 7, and they basically were created in 1832 to try to bring the dead out of the center of London because it was basically overflowing and it was smelly and disgusting, and they were worried about the overcrowding, and of course the desire for more land in the city was necessary, so they wanted to stop having graveyards in the city. Now, the tombs and the buildings that are constructed in a Victorian Gothic style, which was very popular mid to late 1800s, and of course it was a highly sought-after burial ground. By the end of World War II, the cemetery was overgrown, unattended, and in serious disrepair, which added to its very creepy feeling, and it's the same today. There's one side you're allowed to go in and explore on your own. The other side you have to be escorted because it's seriously overgrown. Now, during the 1970s, the infamous cemetery became the location of another Gothic tradition, the horror films of the movie studio Hammer. The films regenerated the public interest in this cemetery, and stories of grave robbing, desecration, and vampires started to appear in the news. As described in the book Beyond the Grave, many claim to see a particular creature hovering over the graves. Scores of vampire hunters regularly converged on the graveyard in the dead of night. Tombs were broken open, bodies were mutilated with wooden stakes driven into their chests, and these stolen corpses started to turn up in strange places. And basically this really startled residents when one woman reported that the corpse was in her car in the driver's seat. No, thank you.
Yeah. It's pretty nasty things that they did there.
Yeah. Known as the Highgate vampire sensation, it culminated in 1970 with 2 magicians, Ferret and Manchester, claiming that each would be the first to find and kill this vampire. Manchester announced that an official vampire hunt on Friday the 13th, and a mob of hunters from all over London swarmed the gates and the walls into the locked cemetery, despite police efforts to control them. The 2 magicians were supposed to settle the debate with a magician's duel. but it never happened. Ferret was arrested in the churchyard next to Highgate Cemetery with a crucifix and a wooden stake, and was jailed for damaging memorials and interfering with dead remains in Highgate Cemetery.
Interfering with dead remains. Interfering.
Yep.
Interfering.
It's a weird choice of words.
It is. Like, what are you stopping the dead remains from doing?
Resting in peace.
Fair enough.
Now, neither magician actually found supposed the vampire, and various hunts' graves were ransacked, and the real corpses were indeed staked and beheaded. The debate between Ferret and Manchester actually continues to this day, and the cemetery remains a very popular location for occult, paranormal, and vampire enthusiasts. It's a very creepy vampire cemetery. It's awesome to go see the side you're allowed into. We're not suggesting you break in like these guys did.
That's bad.
Yeah.
But do have a question. Glenn asked, is there a saying that a vampire can't see their face in a mirror? That is one of the, that's one thing in folklore, that vampires cannot see their reflections. Now, depending on the exact, interpretation of that, the fictional interpretations, you'll get varying results. Some of them decide to roll with it, and vampires can't see their reflection, and then there's other ones that are just like, yeah, no, that's a joke. So
yeah, and Hollywood really has promoted that.
Yeah, so it's flipped both ways. Definitely a popular point of folklore when it comes to vampires.
And one thing you need to realize is Bram Stoker is not the first person to write about vampirism. There was poetry long before him, centuries before him, that has the vampire coming out. So this has been around since medieval times.
Yep. So Donnie just wants to make sure that we give a nod to Count Orlok.
Yes, Count Orlok, because
Nosferatu.
He is a wonderful vampire as well.
Yes.
And very much overshadowed by Dracula.
Yep. So. Yes, so cannot forget him. We do not have any details about him tonight, but
I didn't actually search for him. I'm sorry, Donnie. I should do that.
Oh, we're going to do a whole other vampire episode sometime in the future, so we'll get there. And Whitney, we got Whitney covered. So Whitney asked about Mercy Brown.
Oh yeah, she's coming.
We got that.
I could not do this without Mercy Brown. She's the first one I pulled.
Ellison asked, about the crime. Is it a specific charge for that specific cemetery? Good question. The crimes.
I think it was. Because they needed to include the location. I think that's why they specifically said that one.
Yeah.
But I'm sure I could find the actual document online. I'd be shocked if it wasn't online by now.
Oh, probably.
From 1970 it should be.
So Whitney said in Vampire the Masquerade there was one clan that couldn't show up in reflections. So that's one clan now. Mm-hmm. Allison, British law is kind of like this, so I won't be surprised, but the law student in me is curious and will probably look into it.
Yeah, let us know
if you find anything.
It's nice to have a guy who's studying law.
Yes it is. So,
and have a lawyer as well.
Yep. Now, we will get to Mercy Brown. Mercy Brown is not the next item on our agenda.
No, we're going to jump to Germany.
Germany, yep. We're still on the other side of the pond, and we are going to the Franz Haarmann Memorial over in Hanover, Germany, to be specific. So, this is kind of bordering, walking the border between, this is an undeniably...
He was labeled a vampire, but
and justifiably so. So this is less than 100 years ago. Fritz Haarmann, also known as the Vampire of Hanover, or Der Vampir von Hanover in German. My German's not that good. I probably butchered the accents. But anyways, he was a serial killer that terrorized the city of Hanover in the early 20th century, and he was convicted in 1924 for the murder of 24 people. Now, Haarmann mainly preyed on young men by luring them to different addresses, giving them food and drink, and finally murdering them by strangulation or by biting completely through their throats, which Haarmann gruesomely called a love bite. The vampire, as he became called, was known to then distribute the victim's possessions between friends and acquaintances as gifts or sell them on the black market, and he would discard their bodies in the nearby Lenne River. Haarmann's crimes were discovered in 1924 when some children found many skulls and bones on the banks of the Lenne. When Haarmann was apprehended, many victims' possessions were found in his apartment, and Haarmann confessed to the crimes and was found guilty of 24 murders. He denied committing an additional 3 murders, but they have been attributed to him because the evidence just matched up.
Sorry, that was Lulu.
Hi, Lulu.
Lulu just photobombed.
But, Haarmann, he was, of course, he was put to death, executed by guillotine in 1925. Executed by guillotine in 1925, so vampire off with their head, it works. And this happened at Hanover Prison. His last words were, "I repent, but I do not fear death." The remains of the victims were gathered and buried collectively in Stockinger Cemetery, where in 1928 a large granite stone was placed by the mass grave to remember them. It's a pretty real vampire.
Serial killer that bites out your throat. Okay.
Yep, we'll go with that. So, should I keep rolling?
Yeah, keep going.
Yep. So I'm going to go ahead. We're going to bring you back over to this side of the pond. We are going to jump not only this side of the pond, but we're going to go halfway across the continent. We are going to go to Lafayette, Colorado. Now, there was a man there by the name of Fodor, Glava, a pale, lanky Transylvanian immigrant that came to America, as many others did, seeking a better life. But all indications are that he led a modest, if not impoverished, life as a coal miner before dying in the midst of the 1918 flu epidemic. He, possibly along with another person, was buried in the municipal cemetery in Lafayette, Colorado, north of the edge of town. It wasn't until after his death that Glava gained notoriety. Buried in what would have been the poorest section of the old graveyard, Glava's grave was hastily carved and inscribed with his birthplace, year of death, and a few other words, amongst them Trandofer, the Romanian word for rose. Transylvania, where Glava originally came from, is now synonymous with Vlad the Impaler, Count Dracula, and vampires galore. Though not much is known about Glava's life, the mention of Transylvania on his gravestone spurred rumors that he was a vampire. It is thought that a tall, pale, lanky man from that region would be an easy target for untrusting settlers, stoking rumors or attempting to explain away natural happenings with superstition. Local lore says that some townspeople dug up the grave and found blood by Glava's mouth, his teeth seeming longer than normal and his nails still growing. Now, if you don't already know this,
It's all natural.
This has come to light in recent years that those types of ththings happen after death. But to the superstitious, the settlers drove a stake through his heart and reburied him. Now, like a tree, now a tree like any other around grows straight through the grave plot. Some say it was the tree grew from the wooden stake and that the red rose bushes nearby grew from his fingernails. Rumors even persist to this day that residents from the local area see a mysterious figure walking around late at night. So, who is to say if he was a vampire or nothing more than an innocent man caught up in wild superstition? If you do go looking for yourself, bring Fodor a small gift, a coin, a trinket, or maybe even a bouquet of dead roses. Just leave the garlic at home. Oh. We're bouncing back over to the other side of the ocean.
Oh, did I? Yes, this is the one I'm bringing in for our friend Paul, because this is his home area, the Isle of Man. So, Paul, this one's for you. There's a curious grave shot in Malew Churchyard in the Isle of Man. The burial plot is cornered by 4 iron stakes draped with heavy chains. A huge slate slab covers the grave, and it remains a mystery as to exactly why these chains were placed here back in the 1850s, but they still stand there to this day. The grave belongs to Matthew and Margaret Hassal, a husband and wife. Little is known about the couple, but their unusual resting place is steeped in myth. The most popular theory is that this is a grave of a vampire. According to the local legend, an ungodly groan was heard coming from Mr. Hassal during his wake, which panicked those who were in attendance, and to the extent that the chains were placed around the grave to keep the vampire from rising up again. Allegedly, a stake was also driven through his heart before his burial, just in case. Another speculative theory, however, is that Mr. Hassal's death was a suicide, which would have forbidden him from being buried on consecrated ground. Some suggest that the grave was dug from behind the stone wall that marks the church's boundary as a sort of middle ground compromise. The change in the stakes, however, would be a mystery in this version. So we're not really sure why, but it's a fun little story.
So...
Questions?
So Patrick, going back just a little bit, so if memory serves, the old mirrors contained or were lined with silver, so the idea was that they couldn't reflect because the silver, which is pure and harmful to vampires and other creatures.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Yep. So today's mirrors might reflect them.
Yep. And there, I know that tonight we don't have any, but did you come across any vampire stories from Maryland? I'd be surprised if there wasn't one somewhere.
There probably is, I just didn't find it in what I had at hand.
Yeah, it'd be shocked if they're a city particularly as old as like Baltimore that there wasn't one, but maybe another episode.
Yep.
But I've heard that a lot attributing it to Judas's betrayal, the silver coins.
That would make sense.
Yeah, that was Lynette that chimed in with that. Thank you. And yes, definitely loved the kitty photo bomb.
She's getting better, but she's still a little spooky.
Yep.
But she's very judgmental.
Another legend: vampires cannot go out in the sun. That's one that's pretty much across the board.
Yeah.
Yeah. That vampires and sunlight do not go together nicely. Plane tickets are cheap now, so it's good. Oh, hopping back and forth across the pond, yes. Wasn't during the vampire fear that they spiked and beheaded, yet placed an iron cage over the graves of those that had tuberculosis. Actually, we do have...
Yes, I do have a bit on that.
Yep, so we will get to that. But...
Yep, and the cages were also to prevent grave robbing, so
yep.
It's a mixture of the two.
Yep.
Alright, so Whitney, this one's for you. This is the grave of Mercy Brown up in Exeter, Rhode Island. Now, Rhode Island seems to be second only to Transylvania in its vampire lore. At least half a dozen graveyards in Rhode Island were the scene of similar events. Family disinters a loved one from the grave, mutilates the corpse, and keeps it from rising, then leaves looking extremely relieved. The most famous, of course, was the case of Mercy Brown. You see, back in the colonial times, during the early times of this country, tuberculosis was regularly diagnosed as vampirism. The case of Mercy Brown, who was 19 years old and a resident of Exeter, was the last known instance of within the state of Rhode Island where it was heard of sensible folks exhuming, mutilating, immolating, and cannibalizing a corpse to kill a vampire. That's a lot of things to do to one corpse.
Cannibalizing, that one bothers me.
Yeah, it really bothers me. In 1892, a farmer named George Brown lost his wife Mary, then his daughter Mary, and then his daughter Mercy. When his son Edwin was teetering on the edge of death with the same mysterious symptoms, which, as we know today, was tuberculosis, George and the villagers exhumed the bodies of the two Marys to see if they were actually vampires preying on the living members of the family. They found nothing irregular but bones, so they turned to Mercy's body. And here the accounts diverge a little bit depending on which source you go to. Some say she was exhumed from the ground, others say that since she died in the month of January, her body would have been kept in a nearby crypt until the thaw when they could actually dig. Either way, the citizens of Exeter found the body to be suspiciously well preserved. So they cut out Mercy's heart, they burned it, and then they had Edwin drink the ashes. So that is the version of cannibalism. He died. Nobody else in the Brown family seemed to be affected after this, however. Mercy's grave still exists to this day in Chestnut Hill Cemetery. It's a small graveyard behind a tiny white Baptist church off of 10 Rod Road, just a couple miles off of 95. The path goes directly through the center of the cemetery and about halfway down, and on the left is the Brown family plot beneath an evergreen tree. Mercy's grave is reinforced with a metal band connected to a post embedded in the ground to protect the famous grave from being stolen. Directly across the cemetery from the Browns' plot is a small triangular stone building siting as the crypt in the story. So something you can go visit, but just be respectful of it. All right.
No grave robbing allowed.
Yep. So now we're going back to Siberia. 21st century vampire this time, though.
Yes.
Oh, I know why, because I did these in time order.
Ah, well, that makes sense.
For the most part.
Yep. So, we are in Zarozi, Serbia, and this dates back fairly recent. No, just in 2012, actually.
Yeah. So really, this was the most recent one I found.
Yeah. So. In 2012, the Municipal Council of the Serbian village of Zarozi issued a public health warning to residents, instructing them to place garlic on windowsills and door frames and to put holy crosses in their homes. The reason for the warning? Sava Savnovnik, Serbia's most notorious vampire, was thought to be on the loose. After peaking in the medieval era, panics induced by suspected supernatural beings have become somewhat rare in the 21st century. But the legend of Savnovnik has a strong hold over Zarozi's residents. The vampire story goes back to before 1880, when noted Serbian author Milovan Glesic used a retelling of the traditional folklore tale as the premise for his book after 90 years. It purports that after being killed for murdering the woman he loved because he had been denied her hand in marriage, Savnovnik lingered on in a water mill located on the Rajovic on a river going through Zarozi as a vampire. Give me the Eastern European ones. Anyways, legend has it that those who came to the mill to process their grain would risk being preyed upon by the waiting vampire. The mill that Sava Savnovnik was rumored to haunt remained in operation until the 1950s, serving the needs of the small village nearby. After its closure, the Jewett family, members of which still own the mill to this day, began to promote it as a tourist attraction because of the legend behind it and its connection to Milovan Glesic. The building, already aged and deteriorating when it was closed, spent the next several decades in disrepair and disuse. Either out of genuine fear of disturbing Savnovnik's lair or to improve the mystique of the daylight-only tourist attraction, the Jewett family never performed structural repairs to the rotting mill. In 2012, decades of exposure to the elements and lack of maintenance at last caused the building to collapse. With the noted vampire thought to be homeless after the loss of his favorite haunt, the mayor and village council of Zarozi issued their unusual public warning to those living in the area. People, and I quote, "People are worried. Everybody knows the legend of this vampire, and the thought that he is now homeless and looking for somewhere else and possibly other victims is terrifying people," the mayor said in an interview with ABC News at the time. "We are all frightened." Despite the serious tenor of the mayor's statement, two motives, one sincere and one shady, have been reported for the public warning. The first is that the warning was issued out of a genuine belief that Savnovnik was both real and dangerous. The second, more widely reported by the few Western news agencies that covered the 2012 incident, was that the warning and other official statements had been made in order to draw more tourists to the village and surrounding areas. In his 2012 interview with ABC News, the mayor defended his village. "I understand that people who live elsewhere in Serbia are laughing at our fears," he said, "but here, most people have no doubt that vampires exist." Another statement to the same effect was made by Slobodan Jadodic, one of the owners of the mill at the time of its collapse. I'm pretty sure I pronounced that name 3 or 4 different ways now. "We are too scared to repair it, not to disturb Sava Savnovnik. It's even worse now that it collapsed due to lack of repair." However, others have also been less ready to accept the existence of the legendary vampire. Another member of the mill owner's family was interviewed about the mill and its capacity as a tourist attraction by the Serbian daily newspaper Politika, and, quote, "I was never afraid. I spent nights in this watermill at least 50 times alone." But in the years since Sava Savnovnik's fabled home collapsed, no deaths or diseases have been attributed to this pernicious influence. But his resurgence did result in a brief spike in garlic sales in the region.
Because garlic. All right, so we're going to go north of us here and jump up to Griswold, Connecticut. And this is known as Jewett City vampires. In the first half century of the 19th century, Henry and Lucy Ray of Jewett City had a comfortably sized family of 5 children who all grew up and survived the many natural perils and hardships of childhood that were present in colonial America. Over the course of a period of time that spanned the late 1840s to the early 1950s, Henry and 2 of his adult sons, Emmanuel and Elijah, died of a peculiar wasting away disease. I wonder what that would be. Probably tuberculosis.
Just a hint.
Anyway,
Hunch.
then in the 1854, a third son, Henry Nelson Ray, was struck by this strange disease, which again was tuberculosis. And they thought it was clearly the work of a vampire. The family exhumed the bodies and they burned them right then and there in the graveyard. The macabre family reunion made the newspapers of the day due to a large part of the media attention. The Ray family is known today as the Jewett City Vampires. I don't know if I'd want that name. The Ray family plot can be found towards the northern end of the small graveyard known as the Jewett City Cemetery, and it's located at the terminus of Anthony Street in Jewett City, a borough of the town of Griswold. Now, the line of headstones are all bearing the 3-letter surname now mark both the final resting places of most of the family as well as the site of the bonfire. You can follow the timeline events by the years incised into the gravestones. Although Henry Nelson Ray's stone is not in the family plot, there is a grave with his name incised on it at the other side of the cemetery with a death date of 1854. All alludes to the possibility that the vampire hunt might not have worked after all. Oops.
You wouldn't want to be known as the vampire?
I'm already a day walker. We discussed this.
We just need to immortalize ourselves. We need to be the new Richmond vampires.
If it brings us riches, sure. Granted, if we're immortal, we have time.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Unless we're struck by a meteor. There's a lot of them flying out there tonight, by the way. It's a meteor shower tonight. So after this, go out and look at the sky.
Yeah, hang with us for a few more minutes. So yeah, we are going to go ahead and we are going to kind of bring this home.
Yeah.
Even though we're not going to be chatting about the Richmond vampire. We do have other vampires here in Virginia that we are going to go ahead and bring to you. Now, we're going to start up in Port Royal, which
yes. So this is a colonial vampire, or a pre-colonial.
Yep. So, in Virginia, A Guide to the Old Dominion, written by the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, during the Great Depression, there is a passage that alludes to a possible real-life vampire. Portabago on the Rappahannock River was the home of Sir Thomas Lunsford, a professional soldier who fled to Virginia from the British Roundheads. Known as the Child Eater, he was ridiculed in verse by Royalist Cleveland as follows. The post that came from Banbury riding on a red rocket did tidings tell how Lunsford fell, a child's hand in his pocket. Another source discovered in January 1909 issue of the Virginia Historical Magazine is a sort of biography of Lunsford. It describes Lunsford as a burial spot as close to the wall of Old Barton Church in Williamsburg, Virginia. Lunsford was well known, hated, and feared in just about every hamlet of England at one time. His reputation as a young man was of a lawless disposition, and he had a violent temper. He had been jailed for trying to kill a neighbor, but escaped. He was known to neither fear man nor God. He joined the army and was a supporter of King Charles during the English Civil War. At one point, he was placed in charge of the Tower of London, which caused great controversy due to his lack of faith. While the rule of King Charles was being challenged, letters were being dropped in the streets and then published in the newspapers. These were apparently addressed to Lunsford, accusing him of plots against the people and the Protestant religion. They even went as far as to say he was a cannibal and ate children.
Smear campaign.
Maybe just a smidge. Many caricatures and pictorials then appeared showing him in the act of cutting children and women into steaks. They were also political poets who made Lunsford the subject of their poems, vilifying him even more. Even Sir Walter Scott, in his novel Woodstock, wrote about a gentleman named Roger Wildrake to have been one of Lunsford's baby eaters. It's hard to know if the accusations were true, as the country was in political turmoil and Lunsford had sided with the king, which put him at odds with the general masses. When King Charles was beheaded in 1649, Lunsford sought refuge in Virginia. In 1650, he bought 3,400 acres on the Rappahannock River, built a home, and called it Portabago. It was near Port Royal. However, once Lunsford settles in Virginia, very little is known about his life here. Even though in England he has been called a cannibal and vampire and was a controversial figure, there was no such heinous accusations in Virginia. Probably why he moved.
Probably.
Details. He died in 1653 at the age of 42 or 43. The circumstances of his death are as mysterious as the wording on the tomb in Burton Parish Cemetery. Near this place lies the body, almost forgotten in an old country graveyard. One must wonder if his coffin were found and open today, would there be a stake through his skeletal remains, if they are even there.
Yep, because that is some very sketchy wording.
Well, what do we got going on here?
Yes, I will not call down a meteor in 2020. I'm just stating the fact that there's a shower going on right now.
Don't tempt fate. Yes, Whitney, yes, child eater. Yep.
Fun things you learn when you go back through those old WPA documents.
Yeah, it's amazing what they actually did. I mean,
yeah.
people attribute like the Hoover Dam.
Yeah.
And the Tennessee Valley Administration.
No, but they did a huge amount of oral stories, recording those, especially up in the mountainous areas, just to make sure that that folklore was never lost.
Yeah.
And that was one of the ones that they recorded, so interesting.
And you're getting compliments. Say thank you.
What's in the glasses, Daddy? Oh, yes, our curious kitten.
Still watching for Locust. Wait, he's buried in Burton Parish?
Burton Parish, yeah.
Burton Parish.
That's... Okay, so when I found this story, he was originally buried on the family plot and then moved to Burton Parish.
Colonial
Williamsburg. And so that's why it says, here lies near. Which is very odd wording. So they're not quite sure. He's not necessarily in right where that is, but it's nearby there. Something to go check out.
Mysteries to solve.
So Chris is going to bring us home with our last vampire story, and this one takes place out in Big Stone Gap.
So, going back a little ways, not too far, but a little bit, the publication of Stoker's novel Dracula caused a sensation of fear around the world. The fear further inflamed in Virginia with the breakout late in the 19th century of grave robbing. It was during this atmosphere of horror that the Old Dominion real-life vampire surfaced in the 1890s. During this time, there was a boom around Big Stone Gap and the extreme southwestern part of the state. It began with a local farmer who found 2 of his prized cows slaughtered in the field. This is not particularly noteworthy, as wild animals, both bears and wolves, were common and would sometimes take down a cow for a meal. What was unusual was the way the cows had been destroyed. It was particularly gruesome. They were dismembered with only hindquarters and head left behind, and both of those had been drained of blood. Over a period of time, some other domestic animals were found butchered in the same manner. Suspicion fell on a reclusive European known as Rupp. He had been among the thousands of foreigners and outlanders that had come to the area in hopes of finding instant wealth in the mines. Rupp lived in a crude cabin deep in the woods, far from any other human. He was rarely seen in town. The suspicion started when 2 boys came upon his cabin and observed through a window the hermit sitting in front of the fireplace eating a large piece of raw meat. The boys said it looked like the leg of a cow. Superstition and speculation now ran wild, and the townspeople demanded that Ruff be arrested. However, the sheriff had no hard evidence, or any evidence, as there was no law against eating raw meat. A few weeks later, the town drunk went missing. No one had seen him for days, and when his body was found in the woods, it was completely drained of blood and missing an arm and a leg. The location of the body was only a quarter mile from Rupp's cabin. No action was taken at this time. Then, a second man was murdered, a traveling salesman, and again found near Rupp's cabin. This body was also drained of blood and missing limbs. This time, a group of vigilantes took matters into their own hands. Armed, they marched to the cabin at night. The door was unlocked, and when they entered, they walked into a horrid, nightmarish scene. Body parts were strewn all over the floor, and the stench was so overpowering that several men ran out to retch. Rupp was nowhere to be found. The group set fire to the cabin and burned it to the ground. A posse was formed the next morning to search the surrounding area for Rupp, but he was never found and never seen again.
Somebody wants to play on the computer and talk to you all. Don't you, Una?
Yeah, so we do have one more.
Yeah, we have the DC vampire.
Yeah, we have one. That was our last Virginia one.
Yeah, because I couldn't do vampires and not talk about the DC vampire.
Yes, we promised we were going to do that
We did
2 weeks ago when we talked about DC, but we didn't talk about the DC vampire.
Yeah.
But so Patrick notes that people still believe that there's some kind of treasure buried under Burton Parish. The Colonial Williamsburg security works really hard to guard the place after dark. And Allison loves a big stone gap tale. And Glenn, thank you for the interesting stories. You're welcome. Yay. We're glad that people watch.
Yes. All right, so a few years after the publication of Dracula, DC's largest newspaper at the time wrote several articles on vampire attacks in the area. It was first reported that the burial vault built by Benjamin Latrobe and located just east of Brentwood Estates had been dismantled and the bodies entombed there subjected to ghoulish desecration. The legend tells of a young girl from a well-respected family living in the neighborhood where Gueldelette College stands, fell in love with a handsome European prince with piercing black eyes. Of course, they had met at a party at an unnamed European embassy, and he concealed the fact that he was a vampire until he was able to get her alone one evening under a full moon. The young girl's pale body was found early the next morning at the edge of a clearing not too many miles from her home. The mark of the vampire on her neck was obscured by her long, flowing hair. The young woman was laid to rest in a fine lace dress that was said to be intended for her wedding dress. She was sealed in the family vault and flowers were strewn over the stone slab. But having been bit, she was going to rise again as a vampire. The prince was never to be seen again, as it seemed he had finished his recruiting mission, leaving behind a vampire to infect the U.S. Now, in the 1920s, the Washington Post reported the sightings of in northeast Washington of a white-clad, beautiful girl whose face was distorted by a pair of wolf-like fangs. The article went on to report the girl had been bitten in the 1850s and the first sighting happened within a few weeks or months after her death. It stated that a woodcutter on his way home saw at the old family cemetery a white-robed figure of a woman floating through a sealed vault. No one believed him until a stables groom's lifeless body was found a few months later. People then remembered the woodcutter's tale and panicked. People placed garlic bags and necklaces around their home to ward off the vampire attacks. The neighbors even placed guards, heavily armed, in front of this burial vault to watch it 24/7. It was many nights before the figure appeared on April 22nd, and the two guards were dozing while a thunderstorm raged. They were awakened by the squeak of rusty hinges. An eyewitness stated that the figure crept out and glided through the woods in the direction of the mansion. The guards did not stick around to see if she went in. They went to inform their neighbors. The next morning, a few brave people ventured into the old estate to investigate. They discovered the slab over the coffin had been displaced. They could not see the girl in the coffin, or they could see the girl in the coffin, and her sharp wolf-like fangs hung out over her blood-red lips. They gasped and groaned and fastened the coffin lid shut before running. Nobody mentioned an attempt to stake her heart. An encounter would happen months later. A man ran into the figure as it floated through the trees to now vine-covered vault. He said it laughed a maniacal laugh, emitted a foul odor, and then he saw the gleam of hellfire in its eyes. The man actually died just a few weeks after the encounter. The family of the girl actually moves away because the neighbors started to make them feel rather unwelcome. No one knows, or no one would actually buy the vacant lot for quite a while. It became known as the Vampire House, and it was deserted. Eventually, somebody who was unfamiliar with the story finally moves in, and this tempts the figure to rise again. The new occupants describe seeing a horrible figure gazing in the windows of an upper room. Hello, Stephen King. Yeah. I have to wonder if this is where he might have gotten that idea from.
Probably, possibly.
Possibly. They, of course, move out very quickly.
Or does real life get ideas from Stephen King?
I don't know. I mean, he wasn't around at this point.
I know.
And again, the neighbors hang up the garlic. When an article was written in 1923 describing the vault as having the doors hanging on rusty hinges and the hands of time obliterating the family name on the vault, sections of the sandstone had fallen and laid across the sides of the vault. The legend spanned a century, and the last victims were the ones mentioned above in the article. The vigilantes that then desecrated the tomb may have finally succeeded in killing the vampire, or maybe the vampires moved to a different part of town where no one is going to question two holes in one's neck. I wouldn't blame her for moving to a different part of town.
Whitney says that the story was, well, the lady in white and the ambassador was very, very gothic and romantic.
It's a good one to end with.
It is. Yep, and yeah, that is it for this week.
Yes.
But
next week.
we will be back
next week.
Not 2 weeks. We will be back next week. We're
Yeah.
making up for the Monday that we missed last month.
Yes.
So and next week could completely go off the rails.
Yeah, so I decided I wanted to do pop culture horror. So we're looking at the real life stories that have actually inspired novels and movies and video games. And so we're looking kind of at those stories. It's not true ghost stories, but it's inspirational stories.
Yeah.
Because we love horror stuff.
And so far the script is.
It needs work still.
It needs a lot of work.
I'm working on it.
I need to do my part on this. Because actually, it wasn't pop culture my idea.
Yes, it was.
It was my idea. So yeah,
I did the research. He needs to make it sound good.
I need to clean it up. So, but yeah, it's gonna be. Well, it'll be fun in any case. But it's gonna be a little different than our other episodes. We're not gonna be talking about the kind of true paranormal experiences and whatnot that people have had. This is gonna be very much a real life tales inspiring fiction type thing. Yeah. But it should be fun. We hope.
Something different.
So, but yeah, with that, I mean, gosh, let's see what we got. We're just coasting at this point right now because this we're still tired from Saturday. I was up at 4:30 this morning for work.
I was up at 5:15.
That was kind of brutal.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we got the end of the day with you guys, which
it is always fun.
That's always fun.
Sweetheart, please don't knock over the camera.
Might be looking to put an end to our evening already.
Excuse the extreme close-up while I hold the camera.
Yeah, she is right behind it, getting ready to bump it over. But yeah, let's see. This week we're doing doing Thanksgiving ourselves at home on Thursday.
And I'll be doing some Facebook Live cooking ahead of time so people can see some of our traditional family sides.
Yep. Well, we're gonna have some. We're gonna have some fun and all that good stuff.
Yep.
But yeah, we will be back next Monday.
And then take a week off, and then we'll be on our usual every other weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yes, every other Monday.
Or every other Monday, I should say.
It's not a weekend.
I'm tired.
Yeah, 4:30 a.m. was awful. 4:30 a.m. to go into the office, to be in the car, and I drove all the way out to middle of nowhere, West Virginia today and back.
I don't envy him.
I got to spend a few hours there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a long day.
Okay.
But anyways, thank you guys for watching.
Yes, thank you.
Now I'm just rambling, and you're probably boring you guys to tears, and we don't want to do that. We want you guys to come back next week.
Yep, so we will catch you guys later, and again, we're still offering tours. Next month we will actually shift down to our completely low season schedule of just one tour
a
week, but
allow us to catch our breath too.
Yeah, allow us to have time with families, to recuperate, to stay safe.
Good stuff like that.
Yep.
But in the meantime, you guys stay safe too. I know it's crazy out there right now. We don't want to really get into that because this is an escape from that.
Yes.
So we will stick to the spooky stuff and leave the real world to somebody else.
For now.
And
And we will catch you guys next Monday.
Yep. So y'all have a good night.
Bye.